You are live in the CNN newsroom. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Thank you for being here. We have breaking news out of Paris, where an attacker went on a stabbing spree, killing at least one person and injuring four, two of them seriously. It happened near the city's iconic opera house. Now, if you're familiar with Paris, this is in the city's second arrondissement, just a short walk from the Louvre Museum. Police say the attacker is also dead. CNN international correspondent Jim Bitterman is joining us now over the phone. Jim, what have you learned?
Well, Anna, not a whole lot more than the last time. Basically, the assailant went after five people, apparently. One of those people is now dead. Two are gravely injured, and two are slightly injured. This occurred, it is close to the Paris Opera House, about a 10-minute walk away, but it's not at the Opera House itself. It's on a street called Rue Montsigny. And the attacker was killed by police as he was committing his act, apparently. It happened very quickly, apparently. And the terrorism prosecutor says that they are still evaluating whether or not they're going to get involved. What that means is, Anna, they're not sure that this was a terrorism-related event. Basically, if there is a terrorism event, they are usually quite quick in declaring that, because it means that they get their investigators on the scene right away. But the fact that he's hesitating and not deciding whether or not it is terrorism indicates, to me anyway, that it's probably not going to end up being terrorism. I think he would be out there on the scene himself, probably, if it was some kind of a terrorism-related event. So that's the way it stands now. We may learn more in the next hour or so.
You provide that good perspective for us, Jim, but have police indicated any possible motive for the attack?
No, not at all, not at all. And, I heard you talking earlier with Josh about knife attacks, and yes, there have been a number of them in Paris, but of course, the injuries and deaths are quite low when compared to gun attacks, because it's a lot more difficult to go at someone with a knife. But it is a weapon that's used more frequently here, simply because the gun control laws in France are such that it is difficult to get guns. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. And there have been a number of knife attacks, including some against police officers, and including one hammer attack against a police officer at Notre Dame a year or so ago. So knives are used, but it's more because it's the weapon that's available, not because it's a weapon of choice.
Gotcha. Jim, stay with me. I want to also bring in CNN's counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official, Phil Mudd. Phil, I know you are very familiar with this area because I understand you used to live in this area. What's your initial read on this?
Couple questions I'd have. There's always, in my view, a gap between what the public thinks about it in terms of motives and what professionals would think. I think Jim is right to be a little bit cautious on ascribing motive. I see a couple things here. If you look at the history of attacks recently, you see attacks using things like guns. As Jim said, those are difficult to acquire, but easier to acquire would be a van or a truck. We've seen those kinds of attacks, as you know, in France, in the UK, and Germany. So I wonder why someone who didn't try a more aggressive form of a terror attack. That leads me to question two: was this person part of a conspiracy or not that might lead to a judgment about terrorism? I think the police will know that very quickly, but this one, I think we really dodged what could have been. There's a tragedy, but it could have been a catastrophe if this went in the direction that we'd seen in previous attacks in Europe, Anna.
Obviously, the big question is the motive, but the attacker is also dead. So what are law enforcement officials doing right now, Phil?
The first question you got to have is identification. I mean, you're going to talk to the people around the scene about whether the attacker said anything at the site. I think that's significant, but not nearly as significant as a couple other questions I have. As soon as you get an identification of the attacker, you're going to get access to an apartment, to friends and family, to social media. Within hours, you should have a sense of whether the individual had access to propaganda, whether he was talking to friends and family about views, political views, whether it's related to radical Islam or anything else. So identification of the attacker would be my first question, and whether you can get a quick judgment about intent. And also that second question, whether there was a circle of people around him that supported him. I suspect not, but that's not a fact yet.